All right, welcome everyone to the first session of the afternoon titled After El Mencho, the Future of U.S.-Mexico Security. My name is Celine Rodriguez. I'm the campaign director for Secure and Sovereign Nation at the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Austin, Texas. I'm very grateful that you chose to spend this session here with us. We've got a really great panel lined up, and I'm just going to get straight into introducing them. First, right here, we have Deputy Administrator from the DEA, Daniel Salter. He is the second in command, and I just learned we're actually from the same small town on the Texas border, Del Rio, so we're like related now. So please welcome Deputy Administrator Daniel Salter. Next to him, we have Jason Jones. He is a retired captain from the Texas Department of Public Safety and the CEO of Omni Intelligence. A big round of applause for Jason. And at the end of the panel, we have my colleague from TPPF, Ammon Blair. He is our senior fellow at Secure and Sovereign Nation, our senior fellow for border security. He is a former Border Patrol, former U.S. Army. So we've got a super well-versed panel on these issues, and please a round of applause for this panel so we can begin. Okay, so let's just dig into this. If you're on Twitter or any social media, Mexico is a hot topic right now, specifically the future of U.S.-Mexico relations. I can't stress enough how much is going on. I'm very overwhelmed by all of it. So there has been a series of events over the last month or so that it's just like one thing after another when it comes to our neighbors down to the south. So while I know there's a couple of big topics that everybody wants to get into, I'm kind of going to try to start in order of how these things are taking place, going back to the title of this panel, El Mencho. So, Jason, I would love for you to kick us off here. What happened with the whole situation with the leader of CJNG, the most violent cartel that we face, a foreign terrorist organization in Mexico? How did this operation come about? What happened, and how did he die? Fill us in on that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be with you. Thank you for the question. I will tell you, as Secretary Omar Harfuch told me, I had the great honor and opportunity to interview him last month in his office in Mexico City. And from the moment they received the intelligence, within 24 hours, El Mencho was dead. Within 2 hours of the operation launching, all major objectives had been met and he was killed. They utilized 6 helicopters from their Special Forces Corps, along with another unit of the National Guard, and used ground forces and high-flying aircraft, and of course some intelligence support from the United States to accomplish that mission. But I will also tell you very clearly here that while we in the United States, we focus on El Mencho as a major win for this endeavor. It is, make no doubt about it. Please don't take anything that away. But I will also say what he said, and that is that please don't get too caught up in the takedown of one capo, as we have seen many times in the past. Look at what has taken place in the national security strategy in Mexico and the massive wins there. Also take a look at what the United States government is doing with the terrorism designation in the bigger picture here for our hemisphere and the unity of effort that's taken place for the last 17 months. We are seeing things that we have never seen before, and Omar Harfuch mentioned that. You know, they've had a drop of homicides from their efforts by 44%. In the history of Mexico, he told me they have never seen that level of change. Not only that, look at the over 2,000 labs that they've hit in Mexico. Great intelligence coming from the Drug Enforcement Administration and what they're doing, working and collaborating as they always have down there. Major changes are taking impact, and I will say this again and again. The cartels as we know them, is over. And that change will be seen in the next 24 months. Remember, I said that.
So, sir, I want to kick this over to you. The National Counterterrorism Strategy came out yesterday. It was about 16 pages, a lot of good stuff in there, but the president identified 3 top threats that he wants to tackle, and the first of that was narco-terrorism and transnational gangs. So we're talking about El Mencho, about CJNG. Could you please tell our audience what is CJNG, why are they a terrorist organization? But also, Jason just said something about how homicides in Mexico are down 40%. What exactly how do they measure homicides? Is that a true measure of success when it comes to Mexico cracking down on organized crime?
Well, thank you. And thank you. It's good to be in the room with numerous Texans again. Because I live up here now. There's a bunch of alligators outside this building. But I wanted to, listen, what a great question. And listening to the captain about what's going on in Mexico. We have never had the engagement with Mexico like we do now. DEA is in lockstep. We meet with Omar regularly. We understand with over 100 employees in Mexico, the safety and security of Mexico and the citizens applies to our people too, because our 100 employees have families there, great concern of ours. But we actually are met with so much cooperation from Mexico that we've never seen before. So when you see the operation with El Mencho, I mean, it started when President Trump came in. And Terry just reported we captured, and it was our first extradition with Terry at the boss, Queenie, who was one of the hitmen for the cartel. He's in prison here in the U.S., and he was a violent individual. So as the captain said, this is a sequence of events that have happened. When you saw the takedown of Mencho, the country was in a state of shock. They did a few riots and burned some things, but they really were concerned about who's going to take over. We have that intel. We know who took over. But the bottom line is a 44% reduction in homicides. That's a huge win. You can't, we're talking about everything we do in this country to save American lives. Well, Omar and his folks are trying to save Mexican lives too, and that's important. But it's an evolving door in Mexico. These cartels are ever changing. So our men and women, it's nice to be met with a cooperative effort from our Mexican counterparts.
And thank you for that. Ammon, coming over to you, one thing you always stress in all the work we do is words matter. How we define things matter. And so when we're reading the counter-drug strategy, the counter-terrorism strategy, one thing we see a lot, and even in media, is are we treating cartels as foreign terror organizations, which the president has said they are, or are we still treating them as drug trafficking organizations? Can you kind of expand on what that means and how you get success, whether you define them either way?
Yeah, great question. So we've probably heard it on TV all the time that the border is more secure than ever, and that we usually use two metrics, and that is the number of illegal aliens that are coming across the border, which has dramatically decreased, and then also the fentanyl seizures. Now, however, unfortunately, the country of Mexico is actually the top marketplace in the world for its criminal enterprise. So let's think about that. More than any other country in the world, Mexico is number one. And then the level of criminality, they are number three. Meaning that the cartels are in every single facet of society. And we know this based off of, actually you can just look at, if you all remember, the last election cycle was the deadliest election cycle in Mexico's history. Where were a majority of those deaths? They were at the local level. And you think, okay, if I wanted to control the population, would it be with just the federal government? No, it's going to be where the people are. If you look at any insurgency across the globe, you'll see that it's a population-centric movement. If I can control the populace, then I can control whatever I need to move, whether that is a product to the United States, whatever that product is, or I can have a sanctuary for all my operations inside of Mexico. So the cartels, recently, Secretary Brooke Rollins on Monday talked about the 4 meat packers, right? And about the collusion between the meat packers. She said something actually something interesting is she actually mentioned the Mexican cartels. Who here eats steak? Who eats steak? Raise your hand. You guys eat steak? All right. Who here knows where their steak came from? All right? Because we don't have labeling laws, then there's no mandatory country of origin labeling on your food. And so where do we get a majority of our meat? Well, it's from the Western Hemisphere. And then when you draw that back and you see, okay, well, who is in control of that trade? Well, Insight Crime has done a very good investigative report on this for the past few years. and has shown that the Mexican cartels completely control the cattle trade and traffic the cattle along the entire Western Hemisphere through the Darien Gap, just like the illegal aliens, with falsified documentation, just like they did with illegal aliens. You name it. And then so when they get into Mexico, since we are trading live cattle with only two countries, Canada and Mexico, then what they do is they make sure that that cattle from whatever country they came from is now Mexican cattle. And so when they trade into the United States, you're now eating the fruits of terror. Whether that is cattle, your steak that you get, those of us in Texas, from H-E-B, right? The avocado that you eat, and you name it. So the cartels themselves, if we only measure our success based off of fentanyl seizures, labs being taken down, or any of these metrics where the cartels, yes, are completely in control over, and that 100% does decrease their power and governance. But who here owns a business? If you own a business and you sell a product, and now regulations make sure that that product is no longer available, you're just going to double down on other products, or you're going to find other ways to get your product to the consumer. And that's why we're starting to see super labs in Canada as well. And so that's really at the heart of this, is if we continue to see the Mexican cartels as only drug trafficking organizations, then we're only going to use a small faction of what we have in terms of our capability and capacity to eradicate foreign terrorist organizations. And we're only going to use that investigative model that Jason talks about in terms of trying to go after cartels.
So, sir, yesterday the president said, "We will no longer allow the cartels and gangs that have poisoned millions of Americans to operate freely in our region or to smuggle their drugs, weapons, or women and children victims of trafficking into our country. We will find them and kill them." And that is President Trump himself. And so Ammon's talking about using all of the tools at our disposal with an FTO designation. What tools does the United States have? How do we actively go against foreign terror organizations, not just operating as in our neighbor country, but in our own country, in every state?
I think that's easy. It's easy to answer, it's a hard task. But right now we have cooperation with the Department of War like never before. We meet regularly. We're able to identify the plaza bosses. We're able to identify the cartel heads that are operating in particular states throughout Mexico. You saw this week or last week, we're starting to go after some of the politicos, indicting some of the politicos. Now in Mexico, they're resigning suddenly because they think they know the hammer's coming. They don't know what hammer's coming, but they know one's coming. But working with the Department of War throughout, all up from the north, from the southern part of the border up to the northern border, it gives us another very powerful tool to impact what these cartels can bring to our country. And I say that because what we do, we've been doing this a long time. Never have we seen the cooperation between all the agencies. President Trump stood up the Homeland Security Task Forces, which is a conglomerate of all federal agencies, sharing intel, sharing resources. What that does is it gives our partners at the Department of War a target on the X, whether it's capture or kill, because President Trump's exactly right. They understand that. Mexican cartel leaders, they don't fear death. They fear U.S. prosecution. And so if we can keep that pressure on them, and they understand that, and then when they do come in, I was reading this the other day, they all cooperate. And I'm sure you've done stories on it. When they come here, the baddest, Queenie, all these people, they all cooperate because they have to. Because they know if they don't, they're going to rot in their jail and die in their cell. So I think it's a bold question, but never have we've been doing this a long time. The cooperation between our federal, state, and local agencies has never been better. We have, matter of fact, this week, our folks are meeting in Austin with the DPS command. All our special agents in charge throughout Texas are meeting there to unify efforts to set a plan forward to attack these people that are crossing the border at this poison. So this is a great administration to work for in law enforcement.
And Jason, I'm going to bring it to the next point here. We just saw recently the death of the CIA agents in Mexico. So obviously there's a lot of speculation as to what exactly happened and who really knows there. But sir, you were talking about the cooperation at every level that we're seeing with the Mexican government. So with that specific example, which was in Chihuahua, correct? Which is one of the states in Mexico. What exactly can you tell us, or do you believe happened there? And then how do we operate in good faith with another country when you have some leaders that are saying, hey, we want your help, we know we need to clean up the cartel mess, but then you have federal leaders that are pushing back and making it harder for them to do so?
No, absolutely. But I want you to really think for a second how important what we just heard from him was. We work as the DEA every single day with the Department of War and the United States intelligence agencies to put X's on foreheads. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the backbone of why we worked 8 years to get the Mexican cartels designated as foreign terrorist organizations, which then from there gave President Trump Article 2 powers to do what he needs to do on this subject. And then from there, the unlawful enemy combatants, full spectrum operations, where you take men from the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, and the CIA and other intelligence components who have done this for decades and failed with an investigative model, can now use their experience to drive operations for the Department of War and finally put this thing to an end. Now, I'm not saying we're going to stop the crime problem in Mexico. What I'm trying to articulate here is that the tools of national power, full spectrum operations, are here. We have it. What we were failing for so long that is not articulated well is our Department of Justice. It moves slow by design. And when you're fighting and listening to these cartels, and I spent years trying to go after Lascano, Miguel Trevino, and his brother Omar, who were absolute sadists, killing sometimes in a night, hundreds of people. And the intelligence agencies we would give intel to would say, Jason, we want to do more than write an intel report, but that's about all we can do. So then we would share that intelligence to Mexico to try to drive operations. Now that the CIA, not that they haven't been down there, we all know they have, but now it's come out publicly, which I would never talk about publicly except that what happened. It's very clear that a whole new level of CIA is operating in Mexico. Please understand, with what we have with Omar Harfouch and what we have with these new authorities, we are in a place as America and with our partners in Mexico we have never been before. And I've embedded with the Mexican government now 5 times in 13 months. It's humbling to see their military and our military working together to do Operation Hold the Line together, a hold the line model at the border. It's humbling to go down there and see these soldiers fighting and going after these labs, and I've been to some of these labs. They are no joke. This is on another level. So where I'm going with this, I can't tell you how great this is to hear what he has to say today. And it fundamentally changes the game, and I don't think we've really put that into perspective to the people in our country. We are in a whole new realm, and for the cartels, I promised them for a very long time, their end was coming, and this is the beginning of it, and we all need to look at what's coming in the near future.
Aaron, kicking that over to you, I agree. Any cooperation that we're getting from our Mexican neighbors is progress. But we still know the Morena party is in power, and we know how much they're fighting back against any sort of U.S. help or intervention. How do we operate in good faith when we know the shortcomings and the failings of the Morena party and the increasing rule that they have in their own country, and that they don't seem to actually want to fight cartels to an extent?
Yeah, great question. That's going to be not just at the federal level with the Morena Party, but also their local level, like the entire political spectrum. It's like dealing, unfortunately, with Afghanistan. Our failures or our successes in Afghanistan you can parallel what we're doing in Mexico with that in terms of the amount of corruption from the bottom all the way to the top. We're not dealing now. It may be better now in terms of collaboration. But we're not dealing with like a 1980s or early 90s Colombia where we're going after Pablo Escobar. Who here has ever seen the TV show Narcos, right? So if you've watched the TV show Narcos, where the U.S. military was going down there and conducting operations, going after an insurgency within their own country, and doing so. We are seeing progress towards that, but as President Scheinbaum said, she's not going to allow an overt amount of soldiers coming in and breaking their quote-unquote sovereignty into this nation. But I will say, though, since there is a symbiotic relationship between the federal and local and state governments with the Mexican cartels, they have broken our sovereignty every single day. If the Mexican cartels in a symbiotic relationship with them, and the cartels operate inside the United States, and if narcotics are a weapon of mass destruction, that means that Mexico has broken that sovereignty over and over and over. Every single death that can be attributed to the cartels, that is not only a broken sovereignty of the nation, the state, but also our homes. So with that being said, how do you work with a corrupt government? Well, you don't follow the Afghan model. Anyone can read the Inspector General reports showing that because we refuse to acknowledge the level of corruption within the Afghan government and their collusion, because back then it was also drugs, it was opiates, right? That was their number one, their top product. And so by separating tactical wins instead of strategic wins, by going after their government and also seeing that the level of corruption, that their government also profits from all the illicit trafficking. And so that's going to be very difficult. What we just did with the Sinaloa governor, I think, is a step in the right direction. We continue to put indictments on all those within Morena that we have intelligence on, that we go after. Now, however, we also need to realize that there are going to be repercussions for that. We're going to see a lack of the Morena Party or Scheinbaum completely step back. And so we're going to see this, but we're now in a dilemma. We know that we're next to a narco state. It's a failing or failed state. They even declared their own state of Tamaulipas as failed in 2011 when Jason was still a DPS captain, where the city of Allende was completely wiped out by the Mexican cartels, where they guisoed almost every man, woman, and child. Tamaulipas declared them, it was ungovernable. The Zetas had complete control. And so now here, we're now 14 years or 15 years later. There was a report, started to go along, but there was a report done in 2011 by our own state in Texas, by 2 retired generals, that stated the same thing that Donald Trump just stated this week, that the cartels are foreign terrorist organizations. 2 retired generals said that. They testified not only through a report that they did for the Texas legislature, they did it in they testified at the legislative session as well as in Congress. And unfortunately, back then, the Department of Justice fought them with it and said that it wasn't the foreign terrorist organizations, that they were just criminal entities. Fast forward to today. We already knew they were FTOs back then, but fast forward to today, we're now in a sticky situation where, just like what Celine had me mention before, foreign terrorist, these cartels are so far past foreign terrorist organizations. They now control every aspect of society from the local all the way up. We have a water problem on our southern border in Texas. Who uses a lot of that water for their opiates in all the fields? The Mexican cartels do, with the illegal wells. So you got to look at how many different aspects the cartels control from the bottom all the way to up, and how do you deal with that level of corruption with a country that we share a 1,900-mile border with. I think that foreign policy is going to be more difficult than what I can say or like what we should do in this panel alone. It's going to take an all of society approach to figure out exactly how to deal with that level of corruption when, to be honest, we can't even feed ourselves. We rely on Mexico to feed us.
Well, I'm gonna stop.
Yes,
I'm gonna say something, because right now we probably have partnerships with about 300 SIU Mexicans, which is sensitive investigating units in Mexico.
Sir, they're recording.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
They're right now, the SI units are in Quantico, Virginia, training with the Colombians and the Americans. The partnerships, it may have been different in 2011. I lived Allende. I know that very well. We have an opportunity, as the captain said, like we've never had before. Regardless, we're not trying to compare it with Afghanistan. These are our neighbors. These are a sovereign nation. These are a wonderful country that the citizens want the freedom that comes from being liberated from the cartels. We're not concerned. Avocados and meat aren't killing Americans. Fentanyl coming across the border is killing Americans. Those are the labs that we're blowing up. Those are the labs that we're focusing on. We have to continue this hard level approach that the president's putting out. We've never had a president that stands up like this. And right now, I'm telling you, that's why these governors are resigning, because they know the hammer's coming. And I tell people all the time, with the capture, or the kill of Mencho, the capture of Harinero, we know Pallone is now taking over CJ&G. The X is on him. And anybody else in this lineage, they don't want to be the cartel leader now. It's kind of like in Iran right now. You don't know who's running the country because they know that they put the X on. That's a good thing. And it excites us because now we have the back of a government we know that's going to do something with that.
So, Ammon, you brought me to my next point where you talked about the recent indictment in the news, kind of a little bit of a big deal going on there. So, sir, bringing this back to you, is this the first time that the United States has indicted a sitting elected official in Mexico? And just to recap, the indictment said to protect and grow this drug trafficking empire, the cartel has partnered with corrupt politicians. So I think this is a very bold and a very necessary move by President Trump and his administration, and I know we at TPPF are very happy to see it. Give us a little bit of context. What exactly, what now? What does that mean? We know what Scheinbaum is saying, but what does it mean for us? You, sir.
Okay, yeah, I think the indictment, it demonstrates that nobody is outside the rule of law. And when we look at this, and I know when we deal with Omar and our Mexican counterparts, they see this as very positive. You know, you had very little demonstration after Mencho was killed, displaying that the people are kind of tired of this. So I think they realize, you know, and he was right, there corruption's from top up in Mexico. But there's some really good people that want to see their country come out of this. And that's the ones that we're partnering with. Those are the ones that are the dedicated men and women in the military, in the Navy, in the SIUs that are working with us. They're dedicated to keeping their country safe. So I think you'll see more. It's remarkable. A lot of them are resigning without being indicted. I think we'll see more of that. And I think it's something, I'll just tell you, hold my beer. Watch and see.
So you are from Texas. So Jason, coming back over here, like I said, President Scheinbaum has had the reaction that we expected her to have to the indictment. But I think this presents her with either an opportunity that she could use in a turning point to really crack down on corruption, or she can do what leaders before her have done and close ranks in the face of the U.S. accusations. With your experience working in Mexico, working with the security forces there, what do you think is going to happen with this indictment? I know they're doing an investigation, but how is that going to go?
I'm not worried about the current indictments. It's what's going to be revealed in the future. And making sure that the Department of Justice is on the right path there. Here's what I mean by that. If you remember the indictment of Cienfuegos and the arrest of him, it really caused a massive rift between our two countries. I'm not saying don't go after those who are corrupt. What I'm saying is, do we go after those guys first, or do we put them on the back burner? And what I mean by that is this. Who is sustaining the ability for these cartels to operate? Governors, definitely, like the one in Sinaloa, right? And many other governors that need to be taken down. Those are the tripwires, and we talk about them as the company. And when you sit down and you talk to these cartel members, they talk about it as the company. Publicly, we hear about the sicarios and all of these guys who whack people's heads. They mean nothing. That's not who we need to stay laser focused on. It is those who are within the syndicates that keep the sustainability of these organizations going. So let's just say, and I'm just going to talk out loud here, I want to be very clear on that. Let's just say DOJ released an indictment on AMLO. That would do absolutely nothing to crush the cartels. I'm not saying we don't need to get those people, but what I'm trying to articulate is we need to be laser focused on who we go after. Specifically, we've got the Department of War, we've got the United States intelligence agencies. We're at a point right now where we could really do great things together with Mexico. And I'm going to say this again and again, with Omar Harfuch leading the way. His background is very unique. And when I talked to him, I asked him this question, ladies and gentlemen. I said, sir, I've seen for the last year, you have focused on the logistical capabilities of these cartels. Am I right? He said, yes, we've hit the labs. We're going after all the chemical precursors. I said, but in 2026, I see you've made an adjustment. I see you've gone after El Mencho. I listed a couple of other names. My question to you is, are you going after the company, the crooked politicians sustaining their operations? Are you going after the CPAs and those rotten lawyers who have protected them? And he told me straight out, that's exactly what they're doing. And what he described them as a different type of criminal. And you just use different tools to go after them.
And I think that's encouraging to hear, because just like you said earlier, Mexicans want security for their nation. I have a lot of family in Mexico, and they want nothing more than for their government to protect them from the cartels that are terrorizing their communities. But there's a couple of things Jason said I want you to expand on. One, he said we could indict AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and it wouldn't do much to really cripple the cartels to an extent. What do you think? Do you think that we should take it all the way to AMLO?
Yes, I think that indictments, taking it all the way to AMLO is going to be key. You can see the split right now. If you go on social media, you're going to see a split between AMLO and the Scheinbaum crowd. But man, indictments only go so far, to be honest. The reason I say that is there was a joint operation here, I say here in DC, here in Texas, with CGNG. Does anyone really know how long an indictment or an investigation usually takes to get to that point where they are actually indicted? Well, this one took 62 months. Okay. Here in Houston, it took 62 months, over 5 years. 41 were indicted, 23 were found, and then a lot of them bailed and bonded out. Okay. Jason mentioned the investigative model. And we also talk about the Mexican cartels inside of Mexico. But the cartels operate in over 65 countries, as stated by the New York Special Agent in Charge for DEA. And so realizing that, okay, if we take out a corrupt politician in a certain locality, if I were to put like a military lens on this, it's like, okay, if I were also being indicted, or if I had to move someone who is creating a sanctuary zone politically for me to operate within this country, what would I do as an organization or the company? Would I move my company? 100%. And so what we've seen is also moving that company into the interior of the United States. Now, you're saying that we have great collaboration. Well, I see it differently. In Texas, there is very little collaboration. You're meeting with DPS commander here pretty soon. But those of us on the ground in the task force that we work with, we're seeing very little shared intelligence. The intelligence from the Fusion Center, as I was discussing with the sheriff earlier, he doesn't need to know about a typhoon halfway around the world. When I was a Border Patrol agent, and I was on the collateral intel side, I didn't need to know about what was happening in Arkansas. Or because of inputs equal outputs, the amount of intelligence that I was receiving had nothing to do with the national security issues that I personally, as a Border Patrol agent in the Rio Grande Valley sector, actually needed to be concerned with. And so the Fusion Center model in the very beginning, yes, was great. But unfortunately, that intelligence apparatus, we're talking here about great collaboration in Mexico. I'm not seeing that in the interior at all. I'm not seeing it between the local law enforcement, the federal law enforcement. I'm not seeing it with the state troopers especially. I'm seeing complete silos of information. And I see that you're smirking, but for me, it's not a laughing matter. That's the whole reason why I left the federal government.
Well, I have met with the National Sheriff's Association. I was with the IECP. I was in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina with the National Legion for State Drug Enforcement Agents this week. It is absolutely a collaborative effort. I don't know what task force you're on, but we'll be glad to talk to our folks if they're in that group to make sure we are sharing. But I see a collaborating efforts like I've never seen before. I've been doing this 40 years. I grew up on the Mexican border. I see what we're doing in our partnerships. Like I said, there's 5 of our SACs at DPS right now. I'm not sure it's the first time, but they don't do it often. So the efforts that you mistakenly say aren't happening, they are. And I feel it. I know it to my bones. And like I said, I don't come out and talk to groups to talk about how great DEA is. I talk about how we have to partner. Our men and women that are leading this agency know our partnerships. We've started the Homeland Security Task Forces, which they've had over 9,000 arrests since it's been started. You don't do that in silos.
I'm going to push back on that. I would say just like Operation Lone Star. So I was a federal law enforcement as well, and I was the guy on the ground. What the supervisors see up top, a lot of times is not what is actually happening on the ground.
Shame.
And so when this happens across from agency to agency, you at the top are going to be fed information, right? So inputs equal outputs. What I'm saying is, from our standpoint, on the guys on the ground that are conducting mass deportations, conducting counter-narcotics operations throughout the state of Texas, there are those silos that are happening. And you're giving me information, but as I saw on the border, we also fed information like border numbers. Border numbers were given, and Operation Lone Star would take those numbers. They would take counter-drug numbers that were not part of Operation Lone Star. They would feed all these different entities all together and then use them as their own, so that when they publish the report, they're like, hey, look what we're actually doing. So my suggestion is this. Yeah, 100% I will introduce you to the sheriff of that task force, 100%. Because I also agree that collaboration does need to exist. We learned that lesson. If any of you have ever read Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal, we had Navy SEALs going against people that should not have ever been winning in Iraq. The only reason why they were able to do so is because they destroyed those silos that I talk about, the silos of intelligence. They forced every entity, every attachment, every country that was operating to try to take out Al-Qaeda and al-Zarqawi, because we were losing. Our greatest men and women were losing. And so by taking those silos in, 100%, I agree with you that collaboration needs to exist. I will tell you, though, that I suggest, as a leader in the department, in your department, to look and see where those stats are actually coming from. And if they're not coming from the actual agency, if they're actually coming in from other agencies like HIDA, as opposed to DEA or as opposed to DOJ, and if they're coming from all these, but they're all shared together, and now it's saying that they're collaborative, is my only hope that y'all do.
Moving on into the next topic of this, which is an ongoing conversation we're having right now, is the USMCA reauthorization. Now, obviously, we had a whole panel this morning that was specific to USMCA, so we don't have to spend much time here. But we have been saying that we must link trade and security. That is the only way to get their attention, which we've seen a lot these past couple weeks with everything happening. So, Jason, should trade access be tied to cartel enforcement success? And if so, how do we implement that?
100% it should be. But look, it's very interesting when you're down in Mexico, when you're meeting with the leadership. I've met with General Travilla privately. I've met with Secretary of the Navy, Secretary Morales. I've done an interview with Secretary Figueroa. I have been stunned by these folks, and they are truly trying to fix a problem. It's really interesting about the crime stats, and I'm going to get to this question specifically. Even they have been surprised to the level of degree that they have had and success, because they've learned, and they use a terminology called violence generators that they're really going after. And a great example of that is Guanajuato, where most of the violence was taking place. They went after just a few of the major violence generators, specifically one of them, Alpha One, who was former Cartel de Golfo. Removing these violent offenders allowed unbelievable success. Even they were surprised at the data they were looking at. Now, why am I saying that? Because from Mexico's perspective, they have done more in the last, 17, 20 months than they have ever done in the history of their country to combat this problem. Now, from our perspective, and we're not wrong either, we want more done. How do we mutually make this work without a major implosion happening. And in the next 24 months, I will tell you from my perspective, that is what we really need to try to seal up as things move forward. The USMCA, I think, will play the pending model of that will definitely involve the security layer that takes place and what they're willing to do and not willing to do. But from my perspective, and I mean this, ladies and gentlemen, I have lived this thing for the last 9 years. I illuminated these cartels to the American people to get them designated as foreign terrorist organizations. Instead of going north, I went south to Mexico. And I was in Port Manzanillo, and I want to give you an example. As somebody that lives and breathes this, the breadth and scope of the challenge here for all of these law enforcement partners on both sides. I was with the Navy, and I asked the captain, I said, Captain, here at the port, how much chemicals have you seized? And he said, Jason, well, not just at this port. This is the main port, by the way, where the chemicals come in from China. He said, we in the Navy have seized 800 tons of chemical precursors in the last 17 months. That didn't include the Army. That doesn't include federal, state, or local, just them. And I was stunned when I heard this, because I know what it takes to seize things and the paperwork involved, right? So I said, well, how many chemicals are you looking for? And I'm thinking maybe 20. He said, we're now looking for 71 chemicals. Ladies and gentlemen, where I'm trying to go with this is that they are under a barrage of chemical precursors coming in from all over the world. They are literally having to deal with chemicals that make the chemicals that make the chemicals that then make the dope, because these damn scientists who make this dope have changed the analogs so quickly, so rapidly. The last one they're looking for is mercury. Why do I say that when it comes to MCA? Because at the end of the day, the security of our two countries, it has to be priority. Has to be. We cannot allow 100,000 Americans a year to die. And I can tell you right now, based on, if you look at the counterterrorism strategy that was just revealed yesterday, cartels are priority number one. If you look at the Office of National Drug Control strategy, number one. This is where we have gone, and it's very important that we and our partners in Mexico figure out how to mold this and keep these relationships moving forward, because it's about beating this common enemy.
And sir, I'm going to come to you. Before we go to Q&A, there are two things I would like for you to hit on for us. One is, we were talking earlier about our mutual friend, retired DEA Jeffrey Stamm. So he talks often about, we're talking about global systems, right? What is the influence that the cartels reach? He talks often about how the CCP launders money very quickly and at a very low cost to Mexican cartels across the country, but primarily in Texas. And people are always kind of amazed when they hear that. First, can you explain, how does the CCP launder money for the cartels in America and Texas? And then also, we have our our midterm elections coming up. We have a pretty good idea of how we think that's going to go. Now, I know the DEA, you guys are on the ground, you want to get at it, you want to defeat cartels, but when leadership on the Hill changes, when leadership in the White House changes in a couple of years, what does that mean for your mission, and how do you see DEA operating if we don't have a friendly administration to this mission come a few more years?
Well, that's easy. As I mentioned, I've been doing this almost 40 years. The bodies piled up on our congressmen's doorsteps throughout the nation. As you mentioned, 100,000. I mean, that's a number you can hardly imagine when you look at a football stadium full of people dying. So they'll always have an appetite to go after these drugs that are killing Americans. I don't care who's in charge, what administration. Techniques may change a little bit, but our agency's been around a long time, and we don't worry about politics. We just put bad guys in jail, take drugs off the street. Going back to CCP and their influence in money laundering, cryptocurrencies changed everything. And when we have Chinese marijuana grows throughout this country, laundering money through them has been a big, not only do we have to learn how to investigate them, prosecuting these things are a little difficult too, and seizing the assets is not, they're rewriting laws, because we're not seeing $1 or $2 million seizure, we're seeing like $89 million seizure. CCP's involved in the illicit chemicals that are coming in, as we mentioned, Jason mentioned, shipped into Mexico, that they're using that make the methamphetamine and the fentanyl. So I know President Trump's en route to China here in the near future. I met with the vice minister from China about a month ago. They say the right things, but they're not doing the right things. And they're the kind of person that comes to, they bring Thunderbird wine to a party and tell you how good it is, and it's really, Thunderbird beer or wine. We have to keep them close, but we don't have to kiss them. And I told him that when I told him, I said, listen, if you don't prohibit this stuff leaving your country, then we can't be partners. And they want to stand by side by side the two presidents. And I said, you can't stand with our president until you stop this stuff coming out of your country. So China is a problem. They've influenced not only just money laundering, all kinds of criminal activities and nefarious activities throughout the U.S. and election fraud or whatever, but they are the root of a lot of the money laundering going on.
Well, now it is time to transition into Q&A. We have a mic here in the back, so we'll start right here with Stephanie.
I've been listening to all these security and cooperation activities that have been taking place, and I think they have been quite successful. But we have to assume that the security crisis related to drug cartels is an equation that has two parts. One is a lack of law enforcement in Mexico, but also one big question that I haven't been able to answer myself, and I was hoping that one of you might. Why do Americans consume drugs? Why is this going on? We need to work in both parts. Otherwise, we're going to be repeating this history over and over and over again.
If you can answer that one, you got it.
It's a great question. I'll take that on because it's what we've all been told. It's only you rotten Americans. It's not the Australians, who, by the way, have been dealing with for the last 10 years, and a kilo of cocaine went up to $20,000 a key when CJ&G began moving their product overseas. It's how they came to rise so rapidly and so quickly. Or how about Europe? Europe's inundated with cocaine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine coming from South America and Mexico. But it's you rotten Americans that haven't figured it out. It's just a narrative. What I'm trying to articulate to you is that this is a global problem now. But the American public and the people of Mexico aren't being told that. These cartels are global. He highlighted it clearly. 65 countries. DEA, and has that changed, sir? Is it still 60?
It's 100 now.
It's 100 now. So this is the thing, and I would scream on national television, this is not about the United States. We have to take this on globally. If you look at right now South American cartels, look at the rise of them as Mexico has taken the pressure. They thought they were going to fill the void, and we just started nailing them. That's the win there. That's the win. So it's not just us in the United States. And I'll just close with this so you can have it. The other part of this that's not been told is, they changed the game here in the United States. When I was a meth agent in Houston, Texas, we didn't have a meth problem in Houston, Texas. From Mexico, it was domestic small micro labs. And I'll never forget when the Sinaloans began bringing in their meth from mega labs in Mexico for the first time, and the addicts said, it tastes like shit, but it's free. See, they gave it away for free to hook our people. Same thing in Philadelphia when fentanyl started. Again, started from Chapo Guzman's people. And lawmen across this country know what caused us to get addicted to this. Not saying that we're perfect and we don't have an addiction problem, because God knows we do. But I'm trying to articulate the process of how it started and how they gave away fentanyl in this country. And it's a great example. We've never had a fentanyl crisis in this nation. That started because of the Sinaloa cartel and what Chapo Guzman did, just like he did with methamphetamine. The problem is that's not articulated. And then take that across the world as they expanded it.
Yeah, just to carry it over, ma'am, do you have social media? Do you flip ever? Do you flip it? Do you get most people usually have social media. And a lot of our kids have an addiction to social media. It's an addiction because there's a dopamine hit. So as a company...
Do you mean scroll?
Scroll. See, I'm too old. I'm a boomer. So what I'm saying is this. Just as Jason pointed out, this is a drug war. That's why these are chemical weapons. Just like Mao did to his own people. That's just like the British Empire did to China. They pushed product, any product on social media or any product that you buy. You're being pushed upon by companies for you to purchase it, correct? And so when you purchase something that is addicting as fentanyl or anything else like that, then you're going to continue to want it, whether that's the free fentanyl that was created by the Mexican cartels or anything else like that. So we always think that, just like what Jason said, that it's always a pull factor. We're our own worst enemy. Well, which is half true, yes, we have an addiction issue, but there are many addiction issues. But we also need to look at the cartel side and that push factor. Just like any other company or organization, they're going to push this product onto you so you become addicted and dependent upon that product and can't do anything in your life without that product. And unfortunately, it's a chemical weapon.
Where are you from?
I'm from Mexico.
Okay. So, you know, when I met with the Italians last week, and they're seeing a huge surge in cocaine seizures in Italy, right? Which, you know, they tell we don't have a fentanyl problem. And I just tell them, not yet, unfortunately. You know, what really started this was in about 2000 when we had doctors overprescribing. And that was a push where you see unintended addiction from athletes and people that had a sore back. Doctor overprescribed them with opioids that ultimately led to demise for a lot of people. We have a wall in our building, 7,500 children, young adults that have died from an overdose. Drugs don't discriminate. They kill Mexicans, they kill blacks, they kill whites. We have to look at it as a whole world event.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you all the panelists for the very insightful rendition of your review of the U.S.-Mexican security border. I'd like to ask, our counterterrorism organizations have not been perfect, as you're all aware, have not been perfect. Has there been any strong evidence involving members of the counterterrorism organizations, even foreign terrorist organizations, involved with regulatory capture, in the sense that using resources to leverage on corruption and some of these illegal activities going on that seemingly prolongs the capture of leaders of these cartels organizations and the syndicate? Is there a way we can prevent such, and could we incorporate whistleblowing policies in the bilateral treaty with U.S. and Mexico to curtail these activities and prevent these members involved in regulatory capture from impunity, basically? Yeah, these are my questions. Thank you.
I'm all in favor of bilateral efforts, and that's what we need to be successful. Whistleblowing, and we call them snitches, are very prevalent because, as I mentioned earlier, they fear U.S. prosecution, right? So their only real option is to cooperate. The disinformation campaign is happening more and more, where leaflets are dropped, where disinformation, not disinformation, but true information about some of these governors, some of these politicians that are corrupt, that we're probably never going to put in jail, but yet the people find out, and hopefully, like we talked about, they want to change and vote them out. Those are the things that when you do a whole government approach, and it's not just the federal government, it's the Mexican government, everybody involved to hand out that information, let people know, listen, this congressman, this senator we know is corrupt. We're not going to be able to put the X on him. And hopefully the Mexican people vote him out. They are a democratic country.
I think it's going to be really difficult, given that if you live on the border, like three of us have been, he's from Del Rio as well, like in McAllen. If you go over across in Reynosa, right? You have organized crime. If you look at the makeup of the Mexican cartels, the companies, right? There's actually a lot of them. We're only talking about large, like CGNG is a large organization, Sinaloa, but there's hundreds of different organizations, like smuggling organizations, that seek to exploit local businesses. You have to pay a tax for your electricity, for something as simple as that, or your water. And so the idea that we can do something through regulation, like you asked about, in terms of countering that, man, that is, like you said, that is a whole of society approach that you're going to have to go after, that level of corruption that erodes through just every business, every facet of life. That's not just simply just a cartel issue. That is unfortunately business as usual in many parts of Mexico, unfortunately. And then guess who has to be at the end of that stick? Citizens like yourself, who are now being exploited by every single form and fashion that has that cartel grip. And that's why I mentioned in the very beginning, the cartels in the early days, once they lost that, the PRI lost that dictatorship, when they had that one-party rule, and then the cartels started to rise, and that was like in the late 80s, early 90s. That's when they started to go, just like a mafia, control every facet of society. Business, licit, illicit, and black market. All of it. Just so they could govern the population. Because the population is going to decide who wins. And unfortunately, that's going to be very difficult.
Right now, to go a little bit further, right now, more lucrative is the illicit stealing of fuel and oil in Mexico, much more than drug trafficking. And that's, you know, I mean, it's what do they call it, Hawachi or something like that?
Huachico.
And I never could say it right. Everybody else did. But that is a corruption at the next level.
I want to answer just to answer that. The cartels control ungoverned spaces with hundreds, sometimes thousands of armed sicarios who have been trained. They use military-grade weaponry, they used armored vehicles, and they leverage a network we call the halcones, okay? So getting information on them has never been our difficulty. We know their girlfriends, we know their stash houses, we know their movements, and we know what they do. The problem has been being able to reach them, to get them. And this is where the change up of why we needed the foreign terrorism designation so bad, to have the full spectrum capabilities of the United States government from satellites on, and to be able to go offensive against them. Not work a 2-year case where they've killed thousands of people. So believe it or not, as the DEA administrator was saying, he's absolutely right. We know who they are through our sources. We know where they are, their lifestyle. That has never been the issue. The problem is being able to get them, and that's the game-changing thing that's now happened under the terrorism designation.
We've got time for one last question right here.
So all of you have been talking about the responsibility of Mexico in the drug or trafficking problem, but you guys have not talked really about the co-responsibility of the United States, who has been arming the drug cartels in Mexico for decades. It is believed that it's between 74 and to 76% of the firearms in the hands of cartels are sold by the United States. And it has been like that for decades. So I would like to know what your opinion is on that, and what is the United States doing in that regard, because the cartels are better armed than the army in Mexico, and that is a fact, and I think you guys know it.
I love that question. Did everybody hear her question? This is probably one of the most important questions, because it's a narrative that the full spectrum of how it works is not talked about. Ma'am, you're absolutely correct that weapons in the United States that any American under our Second Amendment can go to the gun store and buy are being leveraged and purchased by cartel members operating in the United States, who leverage what we call straw man purchases. They go to somebody that's either a friend, a family member who has no criminal background, and they give them the money to purchase weapons, and then that cartel operation runs that south, we call it the hormiga, or the ant trail, okay? That's absolutely true, but that's a half-truth, you're told. What about the hand grenades coming from Central and South America you're not talked about, you're not told about? How about the lot numbers that we're getting from the surface air missiles that the cartels are taking in, or the RPGs, right, I could go on with anti-tank weapons, 40-millimeter grenade launchers, 40-millimeter grenades. See, it's a half narrative. In the United States, we have a Second Amendment right. That is never going away here. And we are all about, and I'm sure the administrator will talk about, working operations to stop the cartel operations running guns southbound, because that's when we make those arrests. These are cartel-coordinated operations in our own country. The problem is that the American public and the people in Mexico are not told this. It's funded by them, so much so that within the cartels you have people, this is all they do. They specialize in living here, selling components and sending them back. And I can tell you investigation after investigation how that works. But what's never told to you is the military-grade weaponry coming from Central and South America. It was mostly Guatemala in the last decade. I don't know what it is now, sir. Maybe you can talk to that a little bit. But that is what has allowed them to go from organized crime into an insurgency, into terrorism, into a parallel government in Mexico, and why we got the terrorism designation to crush them.
And I'll add to that this being a whole-of-government approach, the Mencho operation is a good example, and I'm sure you talked to Omar about the weaponry that the bad guys had. It could have been a completely different ending, but they used surprise, they used tactics that they've been trained with by U.S. military, and they were successful. But yeah, there's a lot. It's a big issue.
So on the strongman purchases, real quick. So how the cartels operate inside the United States, they use intermediaries and subcontractors and contractors, right? They need degrees of separation between their operation in the U.S. and the company in Mexico. And so, of course, they are employed by the Mexican cartels to operate it, and a lot of times it's U.S. citizens that are doing it. Now, do the local law enforcement, since they are the first responder in that area, do they have the tools to identify that that individual 100% is a subcontractor or contractor to the cartel? Do they have the intelligence capability to map that threat in their area? So that's another portion or another issue. Have these groups been networked through the United States or wherever state you are at? So that's why it's so difficult, and that's why the cartels do it. It's counterintelligence. That was the difference between the Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel in Colombia. One was so hyper-focused on counterintelligence, so that way you never knew how or where they were operating. Just like any ISIS cell or any other foreign terrorist organization that wants to operate in the U.S., they must have degrees of separation so you don't associate that operation with them. And so that's what they're doing here. They're doing that with U.S. citizens and everyone else, and that's why it's so difficult. But what could we do? 100% southbound operations. Completely stop it. Put a lot of personnel and technology at our southbound operations between the ports.
So I want to thank you all for joining us for this panel today. I want to finish on a note. This panel is titled After El Mencho, and I would be remiss if I didn't also recognize the brave Mexican soldiers and security forces that conducted that operation. And this is 100% a team sport. It's whole of government, whole of society to really get a grip on this issue. And so I'm very thankful, gentlemen, for your leadership in the DEA, for your leadership in highlighting these issues in the media and working with the security forces in Ammon, for you working so much with the local and state level. There's a lot of work still to be done, and I'm confident that we will continue to carry that out forward. So gentlemen, thank you all for joining us, and thank you for being with our panel today.